Hello. Glad that you're all on here. So yeah, my name's Jennifer Morgan Smith, and I am one of the co-presidents of Passagewise, and John is my partner there.
Howdy.
Um, there he is. And yeah, I don't know. What do you want to say, John? You want to give our disclaimer to everybody?
Sure. If y'all have seen us before, you've heard this, but one of the things that Jennifer and I really try to do is offer you some ideas that we have. It doesn't mean they are the only ideas in the world by any means. And so, one of the things that we think is important is as we are talking about certain ideas, um, if you disagree with anything that we're saying, instead of trying to convince us that we're wrong or that you're right, what we would rather have happen is that you just reflect on what am I telling myself? What are my beliefs that have me disagreeing with them about certain things? And because we think it's more important that you know and own your own ideas more than trying to convince us of those ideas. Same thing as if you agree with us on something, is that you do the same thing, is pay attention to what beliefs make me so strongly believe or agree with them on this. Um, Jennifer and I really believe in having fun as we're talking about certain things. So we will have fun, and fun doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to put on clown noses and juggle. It can be having interesting conversations, getting new ideas and just sharing some stuff. So we're heck bent on doing that, and hope that you come along for the ride. If not, I'll blame Joseph for us not having fun, and we will talk badly about him in the chat.
You're welcome to.
Yes, thank you.
And that the other thing is, if you can turn your cameras on, turn them
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Let's be on here. Let's have a conversation. I think that's important. I know some of you are eating lunch. We don't mind if you're eating lunch. And wave, yeah, hi, wave at us and say hello, and let's have a conversation, because we know you're probably sitting eating your lunch, trying to get a bunch of stuff done. We get that. We're all trying to do that in this field, right? So, but we want to talk today about post-traumatic growth. I want to talk how we can be intentional in understanding this concept. I'm going to throw up here the objectives that we have. This is just so you get CEUs. We write objectives. So that's kind of cool. So there they are. It's proof that you should earn CEUs from this.
Yes.
And then here we are. So we thought, as you're thinking about things today, as we're talking about this topic of post-traumatic growth, thought it might be nice for you to just, even if you don't write it down, but really make a mental note of things and strengths that you have gained after a traumatic experience in your life. And so just thinking about that, is there anything that anybody has ever gained from, going through something difficult? Do we learn anything from hard stuff? And I always make this disclaimer. Does that mean that we're like, oh yeah, we're so grateful for all those hard trials and let's hope for more, or any of that kind of stuff? I think it's important clarification that as we're talking about this, we're not saying we're having to be like, thanks so much for all that trauma. Thanks for all the hard things that have happened to me. But really, we all go through it. We all go through difficult things. So, is there anything we've ever learned from it? Ooh, and people are putting in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you're right. And Jennifer and I want to be really clear. We are not toxic positivists, if that's a word.
I
Um,
like it. You're making up a new word.
there you go. Trademark. Um, but we also know that um, after we allow for ourselves to experience the anger, the sadness, those things that happen, that there may be things that come from it that we discover. And y'all are putting a ton of them in the chat that I think a lot of people that have done research on this have found these to be some of the things that y'all are talking about, that people have come out of with a greater sense of, and not just a similar sense or it's kind of a greater sense of compassion, a greater sense of awareness.
I am loving these chat comments. They're so good.
Yeah.
There's
Hopefully y'all can see the chat and can
yeah, because there's some great comments in the chat. And really these are so many things that we learn. I love this comment of 30 years in the field, like surviving 30 years in the field is from the hard stuff when I was young and the help I received. Like that's such a good comment because definitely, this field is rough. This field can be very challenging, emotionally exhausting. And, we need to have the post-traumatic growth. So yeah, I'm loving these comments. I'm going to go to the next slide.
yeah.
Look at this.
So one of the things we know about the impact of trauma are these things, and what can happen with a person in the immediacy and then long term impact of trauma. And what one of the things Jennifer and I try to do is we try to be aware of in our field a lot of times as counselors, as educators, as healthcare providers, we are thinking about them and their trauma and the impact on them. And Jennifer and I really tried to put a mirror on ourselves. And so what trauma looks like, not just for them, but what it looks like for us. And so in many ways, as you think about the impact of trauma on them, the impact for care providers, we have the same impact times however many people that we're facing with this struggle. If you're in a school and there's been a school shooting, you have your own trauma, but then you're also helping people with that. They're bringing you their trauma.
Mhm.
And so it's impacting us in multiple ways and multiple times. And we think it's important for all of us to be thinking about, okay, this is something that is really influencing us. We start talking about this and thinking about this during COVID times. And one of the interesting things is that not only were you having to hear from all of the people talking about it. But you were going through it also. I was
Right.
going through it also. So I'm experiencing it and trying to help others through it at the exact same time.
Well, and I know, John, when you and I talked about this, even at that point, we started realizing that's the same for many different things
Yes,
as therapists, as school counselors, as anybody in that like helping profession, teachers, all these different things. We're in this profession and helping other people, but we also have our own stuff that's going on and that's occurring for us as we're doing this work. And so it's really important that we stay very aware of our own stuff as well as paying attention to what those individuals in that we're helping need. So we just thought this was an interesting thing. We also, and that's why I love the 30-year comment. It fits so well. It's like, yeah, we've got all this time that we're spending helping people, and and then we're dealing with our own stuff.
right.
And so there's this post-traumatic growth that can be developed as a result of that.
So,
So,
so
yeah.
what we wanted to then think about was it's a concept by a woman named Susan David. And it's really interesting because a lot of times in our field, and I think some folks even mentioned it, we've talked about the idea of resiliency and emotional agility.
Yeah, look in
Absolutely.
the comment. Tammy's already got it. Emotional
And
agility.
so you know the and resilience is this idea of can we get back to what we were and bounce back and so Tedeschi and I forget Calhoun, is that the other
Calhoun.
person?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here.
They came up with this concept of post-traumatic growth, and we think it fits nicely with the emotional agility we'll be talking about with Susan David. But they talked about that these events, these traumatic events that happen in life, um, can we come back to a new place, a new place of growth, and not just try to get back to, if we really can get back to the way things were. Um, they were much more interested in can you get back to not even get back, can you be at a new place?
Yeah. So as
Can
we're
you be
defining, can you really become different and the growth? And so all these comments that you're saying really are speaking to that. Like, can we really, there's a graph that's in a couple slides that I'm avoiding jumping to that, that, because I think we could spend a lot of time on that slide. But
yeah,
I mean, I think you're really what you and I have talked about so much is how do we continue to grow and help our clients also in this process continue to grow from the difficult experiences that we have. And we really feel like it takes some intention to do that. It's not
yeah,
just
so
something that
it's
just happens
yeah,
magically.
yeah, so there's an intentionality around can we have a positive psychological, emotional, and behavioral change from an event or events that have created a trauma.
Mhm.
And I think it's an interesting thing to think about. Again, not thinking of just positive, I really have a lot to learn from this, but can we intentionally um, be something new and be in a different place from the trauma event?
Yeah. Well, and it applies to relationships too. And so it really is this, I love this term, like this transformative responses to adversity, building the positive change. And so what I'm here seeing in the chat as we ask that question, it's recognition of personal strength. I saw that somebody said, like, I've learned I survive 100% of the time because I'm still here. Like that's this, okay, I recognize my own strengths. There's new possibilities that I can explore. You know what? This could get my relationships better because, oh, I just hit all kinds of buttons fast. Sorry. That my relationships get better because maybe I do understand people more. Maybe I develop this sense of empathy that people, are talking about. And then it's, I appreciate life more. And then it's spiritual growth, like all of these things. And we're really, to me, it's also about like the hope that we can provide people. Post-traumatic growth to me says there is hope beyond like that traumatic event, that difficulty. And I think that's one of the big things that we do as healthcare providers is that we're providing hope that things can improve and that we can grow and that we're not just trapped because of our experience and our difficulty. And
And I
yes,
think that, yeah.
Vicky in the chat says these ideas go back as far as Viktor Frankl. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think about, one of the things I think is important to think about with this is that there's some timing, there's some post-traumatic growth. I don't believe, in my own view, isn't something that happens immediately. Especially, it's funny, I was just talking with someone who had a really bad breakup, to the point where the person is being really not just crummy to her, but to her kid. That is not the other person. It was just a boyfriend girlfriend relationship, and now he's gone, and he's being crummy to her kid. And I had mentioned this happened last night, Jennifer. I mentioned that I forget what I said, but it was something like being grateful that they're showing their true self and that you're out of it now, and that they're making it clear that their true self is not somebody you want to be around. And she wrote me back and lit me up. She was like, "Can't I just be mad at this person? Can I be angry?" And I was like, "Ooh, my bad. Of course you can." And so there was a part of me, it's like, look, before she could ever consider the crap coming out of my mouth, she needs to feel mad and be okay and allow that to be part of this growth.
Mhm.
Is the first thing is I need to just not like this person and have some hatred for him and be there for a while. And so it was a good lesson for me because that's for me kind of the difference between, it's not toxic. I hope it wasn't toxic positivity, but it was timing. It was a matter of you can't look on the bright side right when you're in the throes of it. And so can I allow for that space to be there? And then find these constructive ruminations.
I really love that idea of the constructive rumination. Like to me, that's one of my favorite words in the concept of post-traumatic growth. So so this is our question in the chat. What does research indicate about the duration of treatment required to overcome the signs and symptoms of PTSD? And I think that's a great question. And I don't know, John, my answer is I think it depends.
Yeah, I mean it's going to be it depends. Research tries to be definitive, but one of the things they do speak about is that PTSD and post-traumatic growth um, follow each other parallel.
Yeah.
And so it's not post-traumatic growth isn't the ridding yourself of PTSD. It's that that they play on each other. And so that's where Tedeschi and Calhoun talk about the post-traumatic growth has to be a deliberate process. Um, and if I don't totally buy into this, but if you think of things like solution focus, what that whole model is based off of is what we pay attention to gets bigger. And so if we pay attention to their idea was people come in and they've been managing their problem as best they can, and then we, in therapy, if we're talking about counseling, we ask them about the problem and they leave 45 minutes later with the problem being bigger on their mind. And so, the whole idea of what if we paid attention to when the problem wasn't there, what was happening? And those things get bigger because what we pay attention to gets bigger. And so if we're only paying attention to PTSD, then we may be missing this piece. But if we only pay attention to this piece, post-traumatic growth, we may not be paying attention to how the PTSD interacts with this. But this is really making that shift into how to deliberately begin to have ideas and rumination around the positive byproducts.
Right. And I think that's in the discussions that we're having, if we're applying this, like in your example, John, too soon, like we
Yeah,
don't need to jump into that soon. We need to allow that space for all of the feelings, for
yeah.
everything to be present. And then it's also having people validate that those things are okay to have. And then it's okay, how do we what am I gaining from this? What are the byproducts? So it's that combination. And so as you're asking this question, I think it was Josh that asked the question. Here's this chart, this, that we really, really like. Because to me, this is this might address this PTSD, as PTSD is on this chart.
Yeah.
So for us, it's like, okay, you're moving along and something happens, right? And our level of functioning really falls. Our ability to manage things falls, our emotional regulation, it decreases. And I mean, even in this little dot chart, right, that or line there of succumbing, are we down here succumbing to the PTSD, which we do? It's understandable to do that. It's understandable that those traumatic events really have an impact on us. And then it's how do we then start growing again to survival with impairment in the PTSD. And then to resilience is that next one, to then this thriving, which is that post-traumatic growth.
And if you look at this chart, it begins all the way on the left. That's where the level of functioning is. And if you go straight across, that's where resilience is to get back to that place of functioning.
Mhm.
Um, I contend, I don't know if Jennifer contends this. I think resilience is difficult because the traumatic event isn't is was not there before at that level of functioning all the way over to the left. So I think of things like an affair. to be resilient, to try to get back to the level of functioning. Well, the level of functioning before the affair, A, may not have been a great way of functioning,
Mhm.
and it didn't have the event of an affair before. And so to try to get back to the same place, you have an affair that will never go away. That doesn't go away. That's an event that this relationship may not have had. I think of Jennifer, someone who got held up
Uh-huh.
on their mission, right?
Yep.
And and so um, their level to be resilient, they had never had a gun pulled on them before, I don't think.
Nope.
And so it's almost hard to think about for me going back to where I was post gun pulled on me. It's
Right.
like I can't not have the gun be a part of who I'm going to be now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it really is the post-traumatic growth in that it's like, okay, my resiliency in that is I'm going to go back out in the world and function. I'm going to keep walking on the streets. But then what do I learn from that? And how do I get up to that higher post-traumatic growth place of, you know what, I'm gonna learn, oh, you know what? Maybe I'm not gonna pull my phone out on the streets. I'm gonna be more cautious. Could that be post-traumatic growth? Are there the things that I'm paying attention to? It's also that with this particular individual, she talked to me about, you know what I learned is that there's a lot of people out in the world that are really desperate and that they're really trying to survive in the world. And I need to pay attention to their level of survival and how they're functioning and pay attention to that. So, not just believe like the whole world is scary and dangerous, but these individuals, so that I don't hate human beings, I have to start looking at them and saying, you know what? They all have a different level of functioning and a different level of survival. And I'm being more aware of their levels of survival as well. And to me, that's that post traumatic growth versus looking around and always being like, there's people out to get me at every turn. And that took some time.
Yeah. And Chuck asked a good question, and I I think it would be interesting to hear your response. I think where the level of functioning starts, you can just take that for initial line and move this entire thing down or
Yeah.
up. Um, and it still highlights the impact or the process of moving through these different things.
Yeah. And I think that's was my thought too, John, is I think we're all at different levels of functioning
Yeah.
in our lives. And our clients are at different levels of functioning in their lives. And so we're all there. And so if we're at the survival level, right?
Yeah.
It's here's Chuck, here's we're down there at that survival level, and something happens and they really fall below that survival level. How do we get them back up to that level where they're functioning better and then keep moving forward and, on that chart?
But I think to me, the whole graph moves,
Yes.
not just one line. The entire graph
Right.
moves down. So if I start at a survival level, then my PTSD survival with impairment, I'm doing other things for survival.
Yeah.
I'm now functioning even lower because of it.
Yeah. Yeah. That
So
was,
my
yeah.
my level of functioning, maybe I don't have a lot of resources. I don't have a lot of coping skills, but now this trauma's happened. Now I'm taking drugs. Now I'm doing other things that, so for survival, that even are lower. The bottom line is it's a lower level of functioning than where I started.
Does that, what do you think, Chuck? Does that work in that kind of an answer?
Yeah. It's
Because
just
I
how,
think, yeah.
yeah. Because it's to me, it's what you're doing to survive.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and the thing that Tammy said, it says sometimes it seems like we jump to a whole new graph. And I think that's true, either direction.
Mhm.
Like it's, we jump past this graph to this whole other graph in our level of improved functioning. And sometimes we drop to a much lower level of functioning,
Yeah.
depending on what's happened. And when I think about this in terms of my favorite topic, is trauma-informed care, it's along those same lines. It's really understanding what's happened to somebody and why they're doing what they're doing, and knowing that their level of functioning may be much lower, and that we're just trying to teach in increments as providers now some level of improved functioning. And sometimes we meet people at all different levels. If you've got somebody at Aspen Grove over there with Joseph, they're at a much lower level of functioning typically at that moment in their lives than somebody who's coming into, I have Amy LCSW up at the top of mine, so I'm just throwing Amy out. Hi, Amy. That comes into Amy's, I'm going to assume you're in a private practice. Your office looks like a private practice-y office right now. So I'm just going to make that assumption that they're going to be at a different level than sitting at Joseph's.
I think one of the questions I had was
Yes.
if you take your level of functioning chart that you come out with your horizontal line and have the vertical line that goes down,
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
turn that upside down. Turn that particular thing upside down. So it's at a very low level of functioning, and now they climb up to succumbing, survival with impairment, recovery, thriving, where they start at an extremely low level of functioning and are able to overcome that through time. So if you take that line and just switch that square, half a square, switch it down so that it's on the bottom side.
Yeah. I'm like, now I'm wishing I had some graphic skills that I could do that as you spoke.
But I think your point's really well taken, Chuck, and I think that when you're talking about then the functioning going up, the PTSD actually helping functioning, it would be what that chart would look like then. Then it would be a matter of how do I be intentional and deliberate in assisting someone in seeing the strengths of their PTSD, seeing the strengths of what that means for them, what they are coming out of it with. And that's where the post-traumatic growth plays out, is that I've come from this level of functioning, this thing happened that is traumatic, and it's actually helped me be better at functioning in the world.
Yeah,
Mhm.
PTSD becomes the trigger point or the
Yeah,
signal event that allows the individual to be able to say, where do I want to go from here?
Right.
yes,
Hmm.
absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think that I used to work with Vietnam veterans, and for some of them, it was across the board, some or wide variety. But there were some that this is what I've learned about myself. And they did it did, they had the flashbacks and some of those things. And the PTSD became almost a friend of theirs. And it really did become the springboard for how they were going to function better in the world, or in the way that they found was helpful in the world.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, there's an article, and I remembering the title of it said PTSD as a survival strategy.
Yeah.
And so it's recognizing, right? We're not just jumping to, all right, like John did last night in his conversation. Let's look for the positive silver lining in this scenario right now, right? It's really, I think for us as healthcare providers, as therapists, school counselors, etc., it's our hope and our recognition too of, can we keep our belief and our hope alive so that we can spread that to those individuals that we're working with, that things do have the opportunity to get better. Because I don't know about you, but I can get really cynical in this field. Like, that's an easy thing to go down. That's an easy path to start, is just, you have people coming into you and they're telling you all these horrible things, and they're telling you the challenges have gone on and how difficult things are, and they invite us into this hopeless place with them. And it's easy to get to a place of, am I doing any good? Like, it just seems like this just same thing just happens over and over again. This world is really difficult. And when we lose our hope that people can grow, that life can get better, that there is, growth potential, then we start joining them in their misery. And then we start sending the message that there isn't hope to them as well.
Yeah.
And to me,
We begin
yeah,
replicating their experience.
yeah. And then I think that's when we become even less, we become totally ineffective at those times. And that's the challenge, is how do we remain effective and stay focused on this? And to me, post-traumatic growth, in my mind, honestly, this chart very frequently comes to mind for me of, okay, I need to sit with this person in their pain. I need to sit with them and help them to really process through the anger that they have, to process through the grief, to go through all of these experience, and these emotions. And then at some point, we can get to that place where they're thriving. And that keeps me going. So that's what I love about this. And I saw somebody say, like, using the stages of grief, to help my trauma and PTSD clients too, like using those stages of grief to understand that that you jump all over the place in that experience of grief and sadness and loss, knowing that there is a process that we can go through, because that tells me that there's going to be some growth. I'm not just going to be stuck and like everything is hopeless permanently.
I think it's an important point you're making, Jennifer, because for me, it's we get invited to view the world the way the people we're interacting with are inviting that are viewing the world themselves.
Yeah.
And that that moves me away oftentimes from the lane I hope to stay in, which is more of I can't wait to see what happens next for them.
Right. Right.
And where this is going to go, and being
Yeah.
excited about people's lives instead of just being seeing them as a certain way and that's it, and
Right.
I think I worked with adolescents, and they invite us all the time, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a therapist, whether you're a parent, they invite us all the time to view them in a certain way.
Mhm.
And they're not doing it intentionally, and they're not doing it because they're evil. They're just doing it because that's what all of us do. We invite people to view the world the way we hope they view it, or the way we view it. And so for me, it is more about, it's not toxic positivity, but it's how do I be relentlessly hopeful, and not accept the invitations of everything is just crummy,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Well,
that's the way, and everything's stuck.
right. Well, and as we're talking and kind of reflecting, I jumped to this next slide because it really is what's our tendency when some emotion shows up that we consider undesirable.
Mhm.
And do we pay attention? Like, how are we categorizing emotions? Do we say, oh, anger is bad? Because you know what? My belief is that anger never gets us anywhere. So if my client shows up and is saying, I'm angry, are we going to be like, okay, let me talk you out of being angry because I don't think anger has a place? Or are we allowing for anger to sit with us in that room? Because just like you talked in your example, John, it
Yeah,
is sometimes we just have to be angry. Like it's okay to do that.
yeah.
But and that's what I think that toxic positivity is that we're saying there's good and bad emotions. And when we start labeling emotions as, so is sad, is sad a bad emotion? Or is that a good emotion? And does that depend? Because I bet we could take a poll here and I could say, is sad a good or bad emotion? And there's still going to be people who say, well, sad is a good emotion. And other people are going to say, no, sad's a bad emotion. I don't want sadness. I want to be happy all the time. To me, that's the toxic positivity is I have to be happy all the time.
Yeah, and I think it really is thinking about what do we, how do we view emotion in society, and what influence has it had on you to how you how you approach it, and how you accept it, or deny it, or try to help someone get past it.
Yeah.
And I think there's that's a societal influence that we grow up with. And I know, from in the therapy world, I know well, heck, there's anger management.
Right.
And I mean, it's a matter of, I don't want people going around beating the hell out of everybody. And like my friend last night saying they're angry, and I clicked into how to move away from it, how to move out of it. And
Mhm.
I saw that as helpful when it wasn't at the moment. Instead of saying, "Oh, let's just be angry. Let's invite anger in, see how it's going to inform you." And being intentional about the anger could lead to growth.
Yeah. And I think I am telling you this group, John,
I
the
know
chat
it's hard
is one of
to,
the best chats we've done a lot of these. And really, the chat today has been so incredibly amazing. I don't know. We've got like some very cool people in this Zoom meeting today. Because I mean, there's this question about like how about when they experience an issue as part of a systemic crisis or climate? Like, how do you support them? When there's societal oppression and domestic violence, racial profiling, school shootings, political systems of oppression. And
yeah.
and I think that's such a great question. And I think the answer really is let's sit with that emotion. How do we validate it? How do we acknowledge that not every person, sometimes we're the ones that is saying to that individual, you know what? You're right. This isn't fair, right, etc. This isn't what you should be experiencing. Not everyone in the world agrees with this either. And how do we create that environment and that safety to have those conversations, even if this is the only safe space that somebody has. Sometimes that's the only control we have is in that room with us at that moment. We're saying, you know what? You're right. That's not how this should be happening. That's not what our culture should be like. And I don't have control of it. So let's invite all those emotions in and allow for that to be
Yeah.
the conversation.
I know there's a emotions chart out there that categorizes them in terms of how much they are connecting emotions and how much they're distancing emotions. And connection and distance don't hold, at least in this chart, they don't want it to hold value as far as distancing bad, because they talk about distancing is boundaries.
Right.
And sometimes you need boundaries. So anger is a distancing emotion. And there are times where that distancing is exactly what needs to happen. So
Mhm.
um, the idea Brandy talked about, inviting it and see what it needs and what it can teach us. And just that whole idea of can we just be comfortable with allowing for whatever is in front of us to be in front of us for a while.
Right. Yeah.
And,
Just
and
letting that
that's
happen.
and that's the emotional agility.
Right. Yeah. And I think we're talking about all of this. And as we're talking, it's what's the cross section of that emotional agility and that post-traumatic growth, and how do they blend together? And really, I mean, like Angela's saying, our bodies are speaking to us. We need to listen. Our emotions are speaking to us. What are they trying to tell us? And can we have an open mind enough to allow those emotions into the room and face them and have compassion for them and understanding for them versus being judgmental of them and pushing
Yeah,
them away and saying, sorry, John, I can't. No, that's anger. I cannot have that. We cannot have
yeah.
anger. Not allowed. Oh, sadness, not allowed. We're not going to be sad.
Yeah, you don't hear many people when they're like, when somebody says, I'm happy, you don't hear many people go, ooh, happiness. What can we do to manage that so that you're not as happy?
Right.
Let's not do that. I have 5 coping strategies for you to get rid of happiness. It just doesn't really happen that way. And
Right.
all right, Brandy, that's enough.
It's called mania. Yeah. So I think, and for those of you who are familiar with Susan David and that emotional agility concept, she has these 4 key concepts. And I mean, that first one is just like, instead of ignoring the difficult thoughts and emotions, it's facing them with curiosity. It's sitting down. So that's what we've been talking about. It's like, how do we show up? And then I love this idea of, okay, I'm showing up, I'm listening to it. And then it's like stepping out is like detaching yourself from it. And then really saying, it's just an emotion. So let me understand it. Let me sit with it in the room. And I love those two, how showing up and stepping out really help us to listen to our bodies, to our emotion, to what's happening. And that to me, like I've used these 4 concepts in therapy rooms, in therapy conversations of just saying, great, let's invite that emotion in. Because they also, our clients have their own judgment calls on what emotions they're allowed to have and which ones are bad, right? So it's teaching them, like people have been talking about, how do we allow that? And that showing up and stepping out is really part of it. And then it moves us into walking our why and understanding, what are
Yeah.
my values? What's important to me? What do I want to learn? And so to me, this is some of that intention and that constructive
Yeah.
rumination. And then it
Yeah,
moves into the action.
yeah. Yeah, this is where I think the connection between post-traumatic growth and emotional agility really is highlighted is,
Yes.
can we be deliberate in and going back to what we are learning from it, what it's got to say. Our body is speaking to us. Can we listen to it, or are we trying to fight and push against it, to get back to the familiar? Our tendency is to get back to what we know, even if it was going back to what Chuck was talking about, even if it's a low level of functioning, we like familiar.
Mhm.
And so there's the fight to get back to what we know, as opposed to can we find a level of comfort in being in a space that we don't know, but potentially, if we're deliberate about it, it can help us be in a different spot moving forward.
Yeah. Well, and I know we have 5 minutes here, and Joseph put in the chat the form. So I want to make sure to highlight that to everybody. I think you're all aware of the chat because you guys have been using it so beautifully.
There
Um,
it is again. Good. Thanks, Joseph,
yeah, and he
because
just put it
it
in again.
it went far up. People,
Uh-huh. Because these are, I mean, really, they're also telling us we should do part 2 of
yeah,
this and continue,
yeah.
which, I think we could absolutely do that.
As a matter of
So,
fact,
I mean, this really, here's I don't know what Dean B says, here's that therapist experience is we're exposed to trauma repeatedly, and we're sent all these different messages, right? And then it's how do we also have safety, beauty, peace, and love in there too? And so it's hard to hold those two things together when our daily experience on the front lines is grueling. And I think you sit down with that grueling feeling, and say, what is that grueling feeling telling me? And I think that is also showing up, stepping out, walking your why, moving on. Like, how do we keep going through that on a regular basis to hold space for that grueling feeling, as well as the peace and the beauty and the happiness that's in the world and the joy and all of those things? I think we have to keep doing this over and over again, which is why John and I always talk about let's build this community of people together, because when we all can show up for each other and we can all validate, you know what? Yes, Brandy, that it is hard to be in this field. Yes, this is a hard field, and it's a beautiful field because we get to see the growth that people make, and we get to see these things that happen, and how much change and how much beautiful things happen in people's lives after difficulty. We get to see that whole gamut. So it's pretty powerful. They're saying, can we just plan part 2 now, John?
I'm trying to, Joseph, maybe you can uh, make a copy of the chat.
Of
I
course.
would love to, if you
Yeah.
could get a copy of everything that was put in the chat.
Of
Maybe
course.
we just do part 2, and because there's so many things we could address
Mhm.
from what folks are saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We do have you, John and Jennifer, for another CE coming up. We could just go ahead and plan a part 2 if you'd like to do that. And then we've got that scheduled.
There you go.
I just want to be resilient. I don't want to grow from this. Their chat has caused me trauma, Joseph, so you're going to have to help me through it.
Okay. We'll work through that. We can do that.
Jennifer, can you put the slide on with our emails?
Yes. There's that one.
If you have questions for Jennifer or John, up on your screen, you can see their emails right here. So please please feel free to reach out if you have questions, for them as well. And they're doing great things over at Passagewise. I'm always happy when we can connect and work in the community together, because I know these are two very knowledgeable individuals, but they're also caring individuals as well. So I'm sure, as you could tell, lots of fun with them.
Joseph, as always, we appreciate you having us.
Yeah.
It's fun. You all are great, and thank all of y'all. We really thank you for the incredible things that you are writing. We will steal a lot of that and make it our own, because it helps us grow, quite honestly.
Yeah. This is that re-energizing thing that we always suggest, like really connect with other people in this field, because we've got to provide that support to one another.
And I think that's part of our ethics thing. We're talking about
Yes,
community a little bit, and
it is.
yep. Cool. Thank y'all very
Awesome.
much. Appreciate it.
Have a wonderful rest of your day and look at the ways that you can grow.